Everyone. It's 1 p.m. in the US, East Coast time, and it's pitch black, dark, 6 p.m. in the UK. It's a pleasure to have you with us for another webinar on AI and instruction, or AI and writing instruction. And we have Annette Vee with us from the University of Pittsburgh. And we are going to spend Annette, we'll probably do 45-ish minutes in total to give people, I mean, this is the end of my day. I've got nothing else to do. But I'm assuming people have 2 o'clocks if they're on the East Coast or whatever they have, if, wherever you are, if you are in North America. You have things to get to, including probably you, Annette, have things to get to. So we'll try to wrap it up a little bit. So let's go ahead and get started. I mean, the topic we talked about was AI as a feedback technology. We'll get to that. But Annette, you have some research to share with us, some work you've been doing at the University of Pittsburgh. But before you get to that, Annette, would you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you've been doing.
Sure. Thank you, Jeff. I'm really excited to be here and talk to folks. So I am an associate professor of English at University of Pittsburgh. I have been working at computational technology and writing for pretty much my whole career. And I started out thinking about how people wrote for computers, that is computer programming. And now I do work on how computers write for people, that is primarily AI. But I've been working in that area since before ChatGPT. And when ChatGPT happened, then my role as a WPA suddenly became very relevant to my research and vice versa. And in terms of AI, I do a lot of workshops and conversations with teachers from K-12 to R1s and small liberal arts schools and things like that. I am very interested in how people are using AI, how students are using AI. I think I am not a pro AI person. I want to say, like, very specifically. I think there's a lot going on there, but that's why, as a researcher, this is just a really fascinating space to be in, a place where, like, this is the most rapidly adopted writing technology in the history of the world. And here we are, writing researchers, like here. So that's exciting to me, even if, as a teacher, sometimes there are some particular challenges with it. So I've been doing surveys with students. I talk with students. I talk with faculty. I'm doing a interview project with Tim LaQuintano about AI and workplace writing. I write on a Substack, kind of just general thoughts about teaching and conversations about AI. So I have a lot of kind of irons in the fire with AI.
Good. Tell Tim I said hello.
I will.
Like Alex, he probably owes me something. So sprinkle that in and see how.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Link his chain a little bit for me.
I will. It's a fun
So
thing to do.
you ready? So you have some stuff for us. So
I do.
you want to
Yeah.
walk us through the slides that you prepared, and to set people up for this. This is so maybe you don't have to. This is fundamentally based on research that you've been doing at the University of Pittsburgh with your students, and it's new stuff, right?
It is. So I've been collecting this data. I'm going to start sharing slides, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
Hopefully I should be. Okay, can you all see
Oh,
this?
yeah, but Annette, before you do this, so
Yeah.
I'm just a terrible host. So for those of you joining us, use the Q&A to ask questions, and you can ask them at any time. And then as we move through this, Annette, I might move to the questions, and from the audience, I have questions, so I'll certainly ask you some questions. But okay, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I thought what I would do is kind of present some data about students and what they think about AI. I think it's really crucial for us to think about what students are thinking about AI if we think about AI for feedback for students. So, and this is data I haven't published on. Mostly, I just keep collecting it. But I just haven't had time to publish on it. And as I mentioned, I was a WPA when ChatGPT dropped in November of 2022, and I saw it coming. I'd been paying attention to GPT-2, GPT-3, et cetera. And when it became public, I thought, oh, geez, we're going to need to figure some things out for teaching composition. And so I started giving a survey at the end of the term, December 2022, and then have subsequently done that for composition students at University of Pittsburgh every semester since then. So there's some longitudinal data, but I haven't had time to kind of examine trends across time. So mostly I'm pulling from the most recent data, which is spring of 2024 and December of 2024. The thing that you already know is that our students are already using AI. And so the question is, are they using it as a feedback technology? Are they using it as something else? You may have seen this. Mark Watkins had a really good Substack post where he traced some of the Instagram influencers and the ways that students are getting marketed AI, which is increasingly aggressive. I know I've seen it come, ads for Grammarly coming into my YouTube and Facebook and things like that. And when you talk to students, as I've done, that they're like, oh yeah, it's all over the place. It'll help you. It'll make your writing easier, etc. So they're really, if they're not using AI, they are deliberately working against this kind of forceful marketing. This is just a screenshot from Grammarly. And, I mean, just like the ways that they're selling it, write an intro for my project proposal. They pitch it as help and they pitch it as work and things like that. But it's very thinly kind of veiled, help to pass your classes. And I will say, as part of this survey, 80% of students at Pitt are using Grammarly for some aspects of their writing. That's a lot. Jeff asked me to kind of preview a little bit of my fears. And I'm afraid AI is something more than a feedback technology to them. I think this is not rocket science or anything surprising to anybody in this audience here. But the question is, what is it to them and how are they using it? So here I'm going to show you just some sample of the data that I've been collecting. So how often are you using the following writing technologies? And you see here, this is from the spring, the Grammarly and ChatGPT are by far the most popular. So the purple and green are the often or sometimes. And so you can see that quite a few students are using them. It's at least 50% for Grammarly, at least, then the rarely, et cetera. That's how you get to the 80%. But ChatGPT, they're using quite a bit too. This I asked starting in the spring, and this is the data from December. It's pretty consistent with what I saw in the spring too. I was curious about the efficacy of our policies. Now, of course, anytime you survey students, there's a grain of salt. I'm surveying them as comp, director, et cetera. Although I'm no longer comp director, so technically speaking, that wasn't the case, but it's still coming out through the composition program. Are they honest, et cetera? But this is an anonymous survey. It's not associated with their classes. So 12% of students admit to using AI when it was disallowed. So when an instructor specifically said, don't use AI in an assignment, 12% of them are admitting at least that they're doing it. And I would assume that that's probably an undercount from what is actually happening.
Yeah, I would too.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to get a sense of their affective, relationship to it. Like, what are they thinking about it for their future, et cetera? Where we are, like many people, many universities kind of thinking about, should we be doing an AI literacy course? I know a lot of universities are already kind of implementing that. We have training for faculty. I do some of that training. But should they, would they do this? So yeah, they're interested in learning about AI programs in their courses. A number of them are not, saying it's a waste of time. This would be another gen ed, waste of time, blah, blah, blah. I already know what I'm doing. They are mixed about whether it's going to be important to their future. About, a third for neutral, no, and yes. But interestingly, and this data has changed across time, students are increasingly thinking that AI text generators will make it easier for them to write. So all of that rhetoric that's coming from Grammarly and these other AI companies that are trying to sell the idea that AI makes it easier is landing.
Well, actually, can I, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So two questions about this. I mean, I think it's really fascinating that they're a little bit mixed on whether it'll be important for their future when I don't know what you're seeing, but certainly what I'm seeing here is we do have employers who are assuming that our students are going to be conversant in these new technologies and bring them into those workplaces. So there's a kind of workplace expectation. So I don't know if you have any ability to respond to that. But let me ask a sort of different question. Doesn't AI just at face value make the production of text, if we understand that as writing, isn't it obvious that it makes it easier?
I think the way that you ask that question kind of answers it, right? If you think of
Yes.
writing as the production of text,
Right.
then it does indeed make it easier. If you
Yeah.
think of writing as a process of thinking and discernment and, things like that, then AI can actually be much more complicated. I find AI sometimes it gums up the works when I've sometimes tried to use it for kind of more intellectually kind of sophisticated writing that I'm trying to do now for simple writing.
But you're
Yeah.
sophisticated.
Well, that's it. Is like I am not a standard user, right? And so I am, I think this is something that Tim LaQuintano and I talk about a lot, is like the different tiers. And there's really interesting research coming out of workplace writing, workplace efficiency and automation, things like that, is like how if AI is increasing productivity for the least productive workers, I'm using scare quotes here. This is part of the terminology for that line of research. Or is it augmenting, the very top? Is it, how is it doing for middle grade? Things like that. And it's interesting because much of the research will show, in fact, I was just in a webinar yesterday about automation of work with Tom Mitchell at CMU and Eric Brynjolfsson, who does automation and work at Stanford. And they're talking about, primarily it's like increasing the productivity of kind of the lower decile, quartile of workers. But there's, some other research depending on the application, the field, et cetera, that's like saying it's kind of increasing for middle grade workers. But it often does not help a lot for the top grade workers.
Right.
Unless they're really, well versed in AI. Now, so much of things, it's like implementation matters, right? And like how you prompt it, how comfortable you are with it, all those kinds of things. So there's so much to be done in this kind of research that I feel like we should all be researching AI at this point because there's so many big questions.
I do too. So anyway, I won't go on. I have a little mini lecture on this, but nobody needs to hear it, Annette. So
Oh, actually, I would love to hear that about the being easier for writing or the automation.
I think that I do think that I think these are technologies that might disappoint us in the short term, but overwhelm us in the long term.
Mhm.
And it's astonishing to me that every writing expert in the US isn't totally dialed in on this. But anyway, I'm interrupting you. Keep going, please.
Yeah, well, I would just say roughly, I agree with that, so many things, it's happening slowly, actually more slowly than the capabilities of AI.
Yeah.
And that's happening in the workplace too. Implementation matters. And this is showing, Tim and I's work talking to, workplace writers, things like that. The implementation matters. And that, all of the rhetoric of the AI folks is like, it's going to, automate everything and it's smarter than, grad students and it's smarter than blah, 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 right? Like all that stuff. But what matters is, do people actually use it? And then when they, are they allowed to use it for their bosses? Like, are there HIPAA requirements that, show that they can't use it? Are there, regulations and implementation matters? But that's true for education too.
That's true.
Okay, so how are students using AI in their courses? So this is open-ended questions that I asked. And these are the top 4 uses that they have now. This data is from April. I didn't process the ones from December. They're literally weeks old. So improving grammar and style. And these are a couple representative comments there. A lot of getting ideas. That is actually kind of interesting, generating title ideas, helping them get unstuck, et cetera. They're using it as summarizing texts. So a number of people, I know, Mark Watkins, Kyle Jensen have been talking about this, that AI is really being used a lot as a reading tool, which I think is quite true in my experience and in responses to this survey. students are reading less and using AI more to summarize readings, or even reading themselves and then using AI to help kind of understand complex texts. And then studying for generating practice questions, things like that. And that's actually pretty interesting because when I've been working, I just ran a AI across the disciplines faculty training seminar, and I'm doing it again this spring for faculty across, all of arts and sciences. And so in particular, the biologists were very interested in helping students generate practice questions and tutoring for tests and supporting good ways of doing that because they're already doing it. But how do they create GPTs or whatever to kind of support that studying work? Okay, so I was also curious about why students aren't using AI. So why do they, given the fact that every student now has to make a choice because AI is all over and it's in their face, why are they making the choice not to use AI? And the number one reason, it may not be surprising, is fear of plagiarism or cheating. So, what Rebecca Moore-Howard has called the academic death penalty is still very much alive. We talk about being post-plagiarism. I have a lot of feelings about that. It's, complicated, et cetera. But students are, at least at University of Pittsburgh, are responding to this. And I think many students are. Desire to learn. Now, this as a teacher, I like to see this response, right? They're concerned about, becoming too reliant on them. They want to become better as a writer. And so they don't want to use AI. They think it might shortcut those things. Some students have a fairly sophisticated understanding of why you might not use AI for trust reasons. So it's, they don't know the sources, there's misinformation, things like that. So that's kind of interesting for me to see that some of that education work about, how it hallucinates, et cetera, is being absorbed by students. And then finally, this was my favorite one, is I just don't find the writing to be that helpful. I think I'm better at generating my own ideas compared to the computer. And a number of students are like that. And so, if we think about students' self-perception of how they write, some students just find themselves very confident as writers. And so they don't like the results of AI as much as their own work.
So Annette, can I ask you a quick question about that
Sure.
slide? Because it's something that we've been thinking about here at the University of Leeds, and it's a question that I've asked people on previous webinars that we've done on this, and that is the relationship between effort and learning. The concern there is that learning requires effort. Any change in thinking or performance requires some effort, or you don't get better. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I think that might be part of what students are saying, but I'm really asking you in terms of how are you thinking about this, about the relationship between effort and learning and the ways in which AI might reduce the amount of effort that's required to perform for educational outcomes. Mm-hmm. That's not the same thing as learning.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. That the kind of production of, similar to the way you asked the question before, is if writing is the production of text, then great. AI is great at writing. AI doesn't learn. I mean, it's being trained, et cetera. There's subtle differences. There's all sorts of learning sciences, kind of debates about that. But I think, and I've seen a lot of other, smart people who study learning science kind of stuff, much more than me, but about friction and learning, that students, for whatever reason, we can talk about a whole host of educational history, social history, TikTok, et cetera, are facing difficulties in their academic work. And when they face a difficulty, sometimes think, well, it's because I'm not smart enough, or it's because I can't do it. Like I'm not good enough for this. I'm not cut out for this, et cetera. If it doesn't come easy for you, then, right, then this isn't for you. That's, of course, problematic on all sorts of levels, right? Because people are going to find different things challenging. Self-perception of challenge matters a lot. And so, but if a student can make it easier, then they can feel more successful in their college career. But I think too, there's a lot of because maybe partly because the survey went through a gen ed, it went through composition. So it's like we do the writing classes, first year writing, et cetera, is the demographics here, which is a pretty good cross section of students. But it's in the context of composition, as they talk a little bit about, well, I would use AI for a gen ed, because I don't care about that, but for my major, like it matters for this. And so I think there's, students have, they're working more, things like that. So they need to make it easier. So I think that, I don't want to go into all the reasons why I think this is the case, but I do think that students are approaching education differently, that, things being hard is not a good thing.
Right.
And it is uncomfortable when things are hard.
Yeah.
I don't disagree.
Thanks for reflecting on that a little bit. I mean, my shorthand version of that would be, all learning and writing happens in revision. And so maybe the production of the first version doesn't matter all that much. Asterisk there. I think it matters more than I've just said. But the effort is in revision. And as long as the revision effort is there, so maybe there's some learning. It's really fascinating to hear you reflect on that notion of it is true here. I mean, I've experienced it over the last few years at the University of Leeds, where students' confidence is a very fragile thing. And confidence matters a great deal in terms of their ability to use the language of my son, power through things that need some power, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And interesting that you mentioned something about revision. I have a colleague here, Jeff Aziz, who's a teaching professor and also an advisor, and also our academic integrity officer in the Dietrich School. And he and I talk a lot about AI. But what's interesting, and I learn a lot from him too, and he says, I hate the idea of students using AI for brainstorming, AI for ideas. He's like, that's what we do. Like,
He loves invention.
Not just in revision. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think he's right. And I don't see people talk about that so much, like, oh, AI is great for proliferating ideas, et cetera. But like, what happens when you are stuck with ideas and you can't think of something? Then that's how there's a kind of power through moment that, is there something positive about learning to power through? And this gets into all sorts of, rhetoric about resilience and grit and things like that, which I kind of don't want to get into because it's all politicized. But
I almost used resilience and grit, but I didn't go there because it's challenging, isn't it?
I think resilience is important, but it has been politicized in a way that like is not helpful. So.
Well, it's interesting because Janice Lauer's short version of the history of composition in the 1970s, like the reinvigoration of composition, was simply the problem of, I don't know what to write about. It was a problem. Her origin story for composition's growth in the 1970s and 80s and subsequently was solving a problem of invention.
I should revisit that.
Well, yeah, we'll have to find Janice's publications on that one. It might just be things she said to Jeff when I was sitting in her office, but that I've never forgotten.
Sometimes it's hard. Like, wait, did they publish on that? Did I have a conversation?
Yeah, I don't know. You just can't, Annette, you're just gonna have to trust me on this one.
All right, I will. I'll just cite you.
Yeah, go ahead, keep going.
All right. So I asked, what do students want us to know about their use of AI? Kind of have a free space for them to tell us some things. So you can read through these if you want. I think it's pretty interesting just to hear, so students are going to use these technologies regardless of whether you say it's okay. And that is, borne out in the data that I've seen. Provide examples of how to use it for good, ways it can help, and how to spot falsehoods. And this is, I think, here's a student making an argument for teaching critical AI literacy in our writing classes. And that's kind of, that's where I fall here, is that, boy, if we could roll back pre-ChatGPT, that might be a good thing. I don't know, it's complicated, but that's an alternative universe that we're not in. But now that we're here, then I do think that the student is right. So, a few students kind of echo something similar to that. There's, some about, I believe the benefits outweigh the costs. There should be encouragement. Class policy should be outlined. So this is overwhelmingly, students want a clear class policy. They want conversation about it. I think it's very difficult for them to navigate. They're navigating across multiple courses with different policies, different teachers, different fields, et cetera. And it's all kind of, very jagged. Some students will abuse these, but for a writer like me, they are assistive technology. And I think that actually is a whole possibility, the ways that AI can help students change modes, that kind of stuff, break things down, make study plans. I think that is kind of under discussed, and I would love to see more research on that.
Well, can I reinforce that, Annette? So for people who want to do work, I mean, I was at a meeting last year, a year ago now in London, listening to students at universities in London talk about why AI was so transformative for them. And there's a different set of class issues in the UK than the US, but there were students from relatively disadvantaged schools and backgrounds who said, this helps me catch up with the more privileged students. And to me, for them, it was a game changer in terms of their ability to get some shortcuts via a technology that they understood their peers to have gotten by virtue of birth and education.
I think that's fascinating. I would love to see more work on that because I think there's just very little out there. And I do think, AI is very good at, say, giving you examples of a genre, giving you 5 different, abstracts that are related to some topic that you're writing on. And if you have had a very, sophisticated preparation in your high school, then you may have gone through that already, right? But if you haven't seen that many, different abstract genres or, whatever that you're being asked to write in, then having multiple examples, having some feedback, things like that could be potentially a leveler. I think there's a lot of factors working against the leveling too, but I think it could be. I mean, the other way that it can be leveling is with students whose native language isn't English, who, of course, have been dinged in classes since the beginning of time, where, they're not following American conventions or Anglocentric conventions of writing. There's like little errors in articles, things like that, and they can iron out their writing using it.
It's interesting. So let's go there. I mean, a Swedish colleague of mine she checked in. Karin, if you've left, I'm sorry to have missed you. It's good for you to check in. She talked about being a native Swedish speaker. It'd be interesting to understand what AI technologies, including the AI that they're now building into something like Grammarly, what does it mean to non-native English speakers in comparison to English-speaking persons? And that's a really important issue because I don't think we're really, at least those of us in the native English-speaking world, really are fully cognizant of the fact that this is an English dominant space. And it probably won't always be, but I don't know, maybe it will always be. I don't know, Annette, whether you have any reflections on languages other than English or non-native speakers working in English.
Yeah. I mean, I do. So I went to Estonia in October as an invited speaker, and I wrote a blog post on this because it was it was fascinating to me because Estonian is a very small language, as they called it. It's, 1 million speakers. And so the data set is very small. AI is not good in Estonian. It can do Estonian, but not very well. So the Estonians are using it for English writing, but not necessarily for Estonian. And there are certain advantages to that, right? That like here you can participate in global English, which is such a hegemonic language, and that kind of levels a playing field, right? That's great. I'm not learning Estonian. It's very difficult, and there's, only 1 million speakers, right? So there may be pressures on the one hand so that this could preserve a language, right? So that they can still use a native language. On the other hand, it contributes to the hegemony because it's just better and better. And there's in that blog post, I quoted somebody from Iceland Iceland is very actively kind of working on this. And again, a small language, smaller language. And what happens if, your phone, like Siri, works better in English, all of your apps work better in English. And the more that AI gets You know, it's generating auto, you know, text to your friends for scheduling things, whatever, then you're going to be interacting more in English than in Icelandic. And so that kind of, you know, there's dangers to small languages for that. And then, you know, for students who are operating, you know, kind of forced to operate in English because of global English dominance, I think, you know, I do think that there's some advantages. On the other hand, yeah, I mean, I just like, as an English speaker, it feels, I want to see more research in this, especially coming from people who are non-native English speakers.
We're just full of research prompts for people today.
I know. I really, if anybody is a grad student paying attention here and looking for a dissertation topic, hit me up. I mean, I'm just gonna I can think of like a dozen of them a day about AI because there's so much.
It's just true for mid-career academics who need to reset their research programs.
Yes. Also, anybody looking for research topics, please hit me up.
It's a professional development seminar. Let me ask you a question that's on the questions have been submitted since I've
Sure.
talked to you. You may have answered it with a little bit with the fact that the population for this are first year writing students, so in that general. But have you disaggregated the survey data by student level? And do you notice any difference, or do you have the data that would allow you to notice any difference among students as they mature in their time at university?
I do so I do have them say, you know, are they first year, second year, third year, et cetera. And this went out to all composition classes. So many of them are first year, just by the numbers, but a number of them are second, third, beyond. I also just this fall decided to ask about whether students were English or English native speakers or non-native speakers. Previously, I had asked, are you comfortable writing in English? Because I didn't want to kind of have you know, when you write a survey, like you want to be careful about the questions you ask so that people don't feel vulnerable or accused or whatever. And since this is a kind of sensitive topic about use of AI, I didn't ask that question. But ultimately this fall decided that I did want to ask that question about non-native speaking because I think that data is important. But I have not disaggregated it. It's pretty fresh, but that's on my agenda because I think that there's a lot to be done.
Good. Well, keep going, please.
Sure. Okay. So here's where we get to the feedback part a little more explicitly, is what do students think about instructor use of AI? And this is something that I also was like really careful about in the survey design. I consulted with my department chair, with our director of undergraduate studies. Like, how do I want to know how they feel about AI for feedback, because I have, you know, what and I've written about this elsewhere, is like, I'm really deeply concerned about AI being presented as an alternative to writing teachers and writing tutors. And, you know, I know Jeff Eli Review is very good about this. Like, it's not just a set it and forget it technology. Like, humans have to be involved. It facilitates feedback, but it facilitates human feedback, all those kinds of things, which is like smart writing instructor design, right? But what tech companies want, what Grammarly wants, et cetera, is a kind of like a set it and forget it, you know, technology response. So and when I think,
Annette, yeah, I have to say this at this point, and this is why everyone should use Eli Review. But keep going.
Excellent. But I think, you know, as a WPA, I don't feel that pressure at Pitt, but I do see that elsewhere. And I feel that, you know, actually, I know Kyle Jensen addressed this at ASU, where they were misrepresented publicly, you know, that they were going to use bots to replace teachers, but that wasn't the case. And it was a misquote and all these things, right? But people are very anxious about that, and understandably so. I'm anxious about that. But, you know, as a WPA, one of the things I learned from Brad Hughes, who was very long writing center director and writing across the curriculum director at University of Wisconsin, is data, data, data. Like, always get data as a WPA and use it kind of defensively. So what I want is data from students about their affective relationship about AI in order to kind of defend against that threat if it ever comes. So I wanted to ask this question. But I wanted to be really careful about it because I didn't want to suggest that we were currently thinking of replacing instructor feedback or whatever with AI feedback. So the question you can see at the bottom, the question that we actually asked that I, again, worked with colleagues on and saying is, what are your thoughts on instructors using AI in your courses? For example, using AI for feedback assessment or course design. So we didn't want to suggest that we were going to do that. Okay, and so then, and this was an open-ended question. And the general vibe of the answers is what I might call conditional acceptance. So it's okay for some aspects of teaching and not others. And they have like, you know, they don't all agree, but a lot of things, you know, they tend to be more okay with course design and less okay with feedback. And I have more quotes on the next slide. But the two, and then on either poll is then students really disliking the idea of instructors using AI, and then a smaller group fully supporting it. So this, I thought, you know, I was not surprised to see a lot of students really disliking it. But they, you know, there are some who are like just upset about it being like, like I attend an R1 institution to receive instruction from practicing experts in the field. I cannot conceive of a circumstance in which it would possibly be acceptable for a professor to grade an assignment using AI. There's a kind of preservation of the university and the human part of it, which I respect.
So this is fascinating. So let me ask you a provocation. I didn't know that I was going to be able to ask this question, but I was a little naughty before this webinar, Annette, and I have a colleague up from London who is in the educational technology space. So I did nip down to the pub before this webinar and had a quick drink with him, and we were talking about this because he has another colleague at another university in London who's working in this space, and so the provocation was, so how do I want to phrase this? He thinks we're pushing on an open door, as the British say, to offer academics the opportunity to do fully AI feedback on student work. He thinks that almost every single academic will say yes to that. So what do you think about that? Is that what do you think about that? And I think he might be right.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if you ask people like, what's the number one thing you don't like about teaching, is the grading. It's grading more than feedback, though.
It is grading more than feedback, but I'm not sure most of the academics really are into feedback either.
Well, and I think we can see that by the fact that it will take students. I mean, you know, some of the comments in the, you know, it's just like, if it takes them a month or never, or, you know, I mean, as a WPA, sometimes I read OMETs, and like, that's one of the major complaints is they don't get feedback. I mean, I know sometimes I'm bad too, right? Like we all have times where like we can't get it back to them in a week, 2 weeks, whatever, some reasonable time period. And so, boy, if they could use AI feedback, then it would be faster and they might actually get feedback. And I think too, you know, I think about things from the writing perspective, but, you know, as I've been working more and more across faculty, across the curriculum, the idea of automating feedback is already here. It's through TAs, it's through, you know, clickers, it's through all those other technologies, including human technologies that are intervening in the feedback system. So, you know, would AI be better than a very poorly trained TA? Maybe, and with less oversight.
Or a poorly trained full professor.
Right. And that actually, you know, this last comment here, a smaller group fully support AI for instructors, seeing it as a tool for efficiency, a way to speed up grading, potentially beneficial and inevitable. So this person says, many professors are primarily researchers. It's not surprising that ChatGPT is a better teacher than most of them. I'm totally in support of professors embracing ChatGPT wherever possible. It's a valid response.
Yeah, I know. And so we can move on from here because I do want to ask another question. I keep interrupting you, but this is okay. You're hanging in
That's great. No, it's good. This is better than just hearing me monologue.
I do think that what we're talking about right now is a wicked problem for education.
Absolutely.
Because it's not a big step from AI can provide the feedback to why do we need you?
That's right.
But anyway, I've been going on about that for 15 years. So question for you really quickly. Is it worth distinguishing between students in courses where where the writing of a text demonstrates mastery, where that's the core of the course, and a particular subject matter in which the writing process itself? So what's the difference between writing to learn and learning to write. Let's think of it that way. And that'd be precisely what the question was about. But do you see any difference in that in terms of the application of these technologies?
Yeah, I mean, well, there was one student comment. I don't think here's my last one here, but I think no, it's not on here. I didn't pull that one out, but it was about like I think it's fine to use AI for writing, except for those fields where writing actually matters, like literature and journalism. And I was like, I mean, I don't know, maybe they're right. I don't, but I like my sense from my colleagues and, bio and psychology, whatever, is that writing matters there too. But that may not be what the students actually absorb, because it's not, they're taking tests, they're not necessarily being graded on essays, et cetera. So I think, I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is how we've used writing as a proxy for a lot of other things. Writing as an evidence of thinking, as, a process of thinking, et cetera. And AI has thrown a wedge into that and kind of made us break down like, well, what are we asking when we ask students to write? Like, what are they learning when they learn to write? Is there another way that we can be teaching say, quote unquote, critical thinking? And, what's the value of writing per se? And it's hard for me to be objective in that question because I'm a writing instructor and writing is a thing I do well and teaching writing is a thing I do well. So, but if I could dissociate from that identity and that investment, that personal investment I have in that, then I think, it kind of proliferates more questions about like, what is writing? Why are we asking people to do it? Should they be doing, there's been a lot of arguments about like performative based assessments instead of writing, things that are harder for AI to intervene in, and that might actually be more useful to students after they graduate. Because that's the thing is like, if they can't, like if as writers, I mean, my 11-year-old wants to be a writer and I I can't in good conscience encourage her to do that.
Oh,
So
you can. Come on, Annette.
I can because of the creativity, because of the
Hey,
process, because, all of these things, right? But if she's seeking that as a job, as the thing that she does, like I can advocate for that as an avocation, but not as a vocation.
let me, so I don't know. I think you might be right, of course. But I think we're actually, one of the things that's really genuinely interesting to me about the near future is what does machine augmented human creativity look like? Uh,
Mhm.
I also have this other theory that we'll have these sort of boutique craft sort of underground economies that develop. I have lots of ideas in that, but it's
I
really,
think we already have that, like bespoke writing. It's like the Etsy of writing, before Etsy got overrun with,
well, yeah, and
whatever.
Eli Review, my dear little technology, might just be like the vinyl record shop of writing instruction.
I love it.
Okay,
You
so
could use that as a tagline, the final record shop of writing instruction.
trust me, people have talked me out of that more than once. So let's give ourselves a little 5-minute warning, and then so keep going.
I mean, that's really all I have is this. So the final, I just have some quotes about the conditional acceptance, where students generally think course design is fine, feedback is not fine. So like, I do think students, I read from this, and if I say some big administrator comes and says, we're going to fire, half of your writing faculty because we don't need them anymore.
Yeah.
And I would pull these things out and I would say, feedback should be organic. So it should be by the professors themselves. I think grading should not be used with an AI. Instructors should always give their own feedback, that there is there's something important about that. And then, okay, so the final one here, which I just thought was so funny, but also maybe true and important. This is why we survey students. I think it would be good to have another perspective from AI, but professors should not use it for feedback because that is one of their only jobs.
It is,
Like we're
yeah.
not doing anything else. But for students, like
We
that's
are.
what they see.
That's
They see us in the classroom, and I think this is what legislators see too. We teach 3 hours a week, and we can't even get papers back within 2 weeks. Like, what are we even doing?
well,
So.
I've been on strategic plan writing groups for a couple of universities. And when you talk to outside stakeholders about what does a research university do? It's a research university. Their view of us is if we're not spending most of our time with students, what is your purpose?
Yeah.
And we forget that at our own peril. So really quickly, a couple questions that I wanted to go through from the
Yeah.
go over a little bit again. You mentioned it briefly in passing about students using Gen I for, I'll give you two questions real quick. Students using Gen I for reading fundamentally.
Hmm.
Talk a little bit about what you understand from your own work or other people's work about that. And also another question, and this is maybe something that you may have seen in your work at Pittsburgh, is do you find that students are using AI tools like OpenAI to get feedback on their writing rather than from peers? So feeding papers into an AI for feedback as opposed to talking to their roommates or going to the writing center and things like that. So two questions which are not necessarily adjacent, but I think both relevant.
Yeah. I think that so first about reading. I think they are using it to read in across a number of different ways. So like one, just skipping reading altogether. I mean, sometimes they skip it and they don't even bother with the AI part.
Yeah,
I think
that's
we've seen
true.
that.
Yeah.
Sometimes they use AI to summarize some things, and then sometimes I think they're using it in a more, I would say, appropriate, supporting learning kind of way, which is, I'm trying to wrestle through Judith Butler, like, help me. Great. You should be using AI for that, to kind of untangle a few things and, maybe feel a little more prepared for discussion, especially if you're being graded on participation, things like that, that can be used to augment and kind of help study. But I don't know. And in fact, I'm hopefully, pending funding, going to run some focus groups with students in the spring to kind of figure out a little bit more nuances about how they're using it for reading, because I think there's big differences between those things, and it doesn't always show up. It's not showing up in the survey data. It's not showing up in my own classes in ways that I can really articulate or disaggregate. So that's one thing. The second, what was the second question? It was about.
Use of the AI for feedback rather than
That's
using
right.
other
Okay.
people's peers.
So I think that is a pretty sophisticated use of AI. And I don't think a lot of students are there yet. I think they are using it for editing and rewriting, and less so for feedback. I think this is one of the reasons why we should be teaching students how to do that. How to use AI for, what do you think about this? And, how do I make this sharper? How do I make this, is this geared towards this particular audience? Things like that. Ethan Mollick has a really nice kind of example in his book, where he is talking about getting feedback on his own book, and sets up three different personas as a response. So like one is, Steve, the everyday reader, and these are his concerns. One is, the editor or something. I forget, one is like combative and always looking for holes in his arguments. So he sets up these three different personas and gets feedback from all three of these, and then he has to, triangulate between them. So that's an incredibly sophisticated use of AI for feedback, which I think is, really interesting and potentially helpful. So I think that's something to kind of note for students. Like, you get different feedback from different kinds of people. If you're always asking your roommate, if you're always asking, the TA or whatever, then you're getting different kinds of feedback.
So thank you, Annette. We've got a couple questions about accessibility of this webinar and your slides. So
Oh yeah, I can share my slides.
okay,
I
so
usually do that.
we can, Annette, we can work with you to share the slides if you want to.
Yeah.
And so the webinar has been recorded, and we'll share the webinar with everybody who attended, who signed up. If you signed up for it, we'll share it with you, and you'll certainly get the slides that way. But we'll work with you, Annette, if you're willing to share the slides to get that to people. So thank you, Annette. It was a pleasure to spend some time with you. It would have been more fun had you been at the pub with me a little bit earlier. We would have had a better time. But
Oh, definitely.
this is a nice secondary option. So thanks for spending some time with us. Thanks for sharing your work and your expertise. Thanks to everyone who was able to join us tonight. It was a real pleasure. Annette, I'll give you the last word.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Jeff. And if folks want to reach out to talk about AI, please do. You can find more stuff that I've said or whatever about AI on my faculty page, and I'd be happy to make connections.
Great. Thank you, Annette. Thank you, everyone. And have a good rest of your day.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye
Bye.
now.